What's something you once believed only to later realize it was propaganda? That diamond engagement rings are some ancient, timeless tradition. I was floored when I learned the whole concept was invented by a De Beers marketing team in the 1930s. Or that diamonds are rare. I'm so glad I discovered independent jewelers on Etsy that make moissanite/lab-created diamond rings. I think my husband paid around $500 for my engagement ring, 1 ct moissanite, rose gold. I'm floored when I hear about friends going to K Jewelers or some big-name shop and dropping 5 to 10K on a diamond ring. McDonald's coffee lawsuit. That woman was seriously hurt, and I hate that I ever believed otherwise. This one and Dingo ate my baby. Lindy suffered so much as people just laughed. And people still believe the lies even after years of being shown that Stella and Lindy were completely in the right. I guess Sally thingy with the two Sid's babies in this vein also. I've seen the pictures of the burns she suffered and holy hell. Her vaginal opening was fused shut. What? I had no idea. She should have sued for more. She only sued because McDonald's refused to pay her medical bills, and that's the only recourse in that situation in the US. The jury ended up giving her way more than that because the injuries were so horrific. To be clear, she only asked for her medical bills in the lawsuit as well. The jury awarded her that and additional compensation for suffering, but the largest chunk of the payout was punitive damages, or, in other words, you fucked up so bad we're hurting you in the only way you seem to understand, your shareholders. Evil-ass corporations could have just apologized, paid, and changed their practices. Easy peasy. Well, I'm glad they got slammed even harder then, both financially and reputationally. Another crazy part is initially she just wanted McDonald's to cover her medical bills, that's it. Chump change to a corporation like that. They refused. That led to her suing to get the amount to cover her bills. And the court was so horrified by her injuries and McDonald's greed and apathy that they awarded her way more than she initially asked for. I agree. Her burns were so terrible. Prior to the lawsuit, McDonald's coffee was like molten steel. Shit would burn straight through a car battery. There was another lawsuit. Remember when they wouldn't give you a cup of water because they had to charge you for the cup? Some guy was dying of a heat stroke and they wouldn't give him water. He died of heat stroke. Go ask Alice. A book allegedly made of a diary of an anonymous girl who was addicted to drugs, published by her parents post-mortem. Except, that wasn't true. It is alleged it as a push to get teens to accept an anti-drug message from a more pure source instead of an adult. I mean, it worked on me as a kid. I remember how it resonated with me. Now it is listed under fiction. And I love that Wikipedia describes her as a serial con artist. Comedian Paul F. Tompkins does a great bit about Go Ask Alice and theorizes that it was written by the guys who wrote Dragnet to scare kids. At least get the order right. Yesterday I tried LSD, and I'm going to try marijuana tomorrow. Sure, yesterday you had a conversation with the earth, and you can't wait to have a bit of a dry mouth. Not sure it's a propaganda, but I used to believe that lemmings occasionally committed a mass suicide. Thanks, Walt Disney, for proving this myth.
Yeah.
And it was only thanks to a Canadian news magazine broadcasting cruel camera that investigated animal cruelty in the film industry, including how the lemming portion was staged. After watching that, I was done with Disney. Hold up, so they just killed a bunch of them? Herded them off the cliff basically for the cameraman below. Edit. After reading more, I've learned that the lemmings were captured in an area of Canada by Inuit children and shipped to Alberta where they aren't even native. The scenes where the lemmings are struggling on ice/snow were staged because the filmmakers used a lazy Susan device to make them dizzy. The water shown in the documentary was actually a river just outside of town, and the lemmings were herded and thrown over the cliff. Most, if not all, of them drowned. Yeah, it made it worse than I expected. There was a whole amazing computer game about the idea. After Iraq invaded Kuwait, a little girl testified before the US Congress. She related being in the Kuwaiti hospital, seeing Iraqi soldiers removing premature babies from incubators and shipping the incubators to Iraq while the babies died on the floor. A few years later, I learned the girl was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the US. They lived in New York City the entire time, and there was no way she could have seen what she testified before Congress. She had never even been to her own country. Turns out, the event never happened. It was all just a ruse to motivate Congress to vote for intervention. To this day, that woman is basically a prisoner in her own home. Too many journalists tried to ask her questions in public. Now she is not allowed out in public at all, and her husband refuses all interview requests. Not only that, but everything she said was a lie. 100 babies taken from incubators and laid on the cold hard floor. They did the same thing with Colin Powell in the next war, sent him to the UN to spread lies. I remember that UN presentation very well. When he got to the point of, these tubes are manufactured to 1/1000th of an inch tolerance, and thus are proof of WMD development, I laughed as I was studying mechanical engineering and that tolerance is what a standard lathe can do. Later analysis showed how so much of that presentation was just lie upon lie. Also Halliburton could make a buck. I don't have an engineering degree, but I remember watching Powell and shaking my head at the very specific things he was stating based on incredibly general assumptions and thinking, that's all he's got? I can't believe educated people fell for it. Educated people didn't fall for it. Americans were frothing at the mouth, crazy with anger and filled with propaganda. The countries that joined did so because of political calculus, not because they believed. None of this is a secret. There are enough interviews, books, documentaries that all agree that this was not a failure of intelligence but a clear lie. If you are interested in this whole story, I recommend starting here. It's a wild ride. No hospital in the world has 100 babies in incubators at the same time. That should have been the first clue. I wish blatantly false propaganda and lies were illegal to use in politics. It's ridiculous that there are no repercussions for it, for the wealthy and powerful. I learned later than I should have that war propaganda is the biggest and baddest propaganda out there. Take everything you see with a grain of salt and do your own research, which is getting harder and harder every year, but still try. Never take anything at face value. Do your own research only goes so far if you have people lying on the record in front of Congress. Unfortunately, our world is far too expansive for us to be able to sufficiently research every single topic relevant to our lives. Do your own research is also a problem for people educated in a school system that doesn't teach critical thinking or data literacy. That propaganda was pushed by the Hill and Knowlton PR company, which is still around today. Jill and Knowlton is also known for pushing the tobacco is safe for you conspiracy. Carrots improve night vision. This is one of my absolute favorite myths because of its origin. So many interesting pieces of counterintelligence work during that era. Edit. Well, I went to read more details including the link of the parent comment. And it seems I have myself fallen for the myth that the carrot story was intended primarily for counterintelligence. Apparently it was intended more to get the public to eat more carrots, so it really was more propaganda. Of course they also couldn't really come right and say they had aircraft interception radar. So they had to come up a plausible sounding story anyway, but it's very unlikely to fooled many Germans, if at all. But it's very unlikely to fooled many Germans, if at all. It fooled a lot of British people. I can remember my grandmother saying it long after the war was finished. Grew up in the US and this was a thing that was repeated here in the 1990s for sure. That my Halloween candy would have drugs and razor blades in them. My mother, you need to check all of your candy to make sure there's no drugs in them. Me, I promise nobody is out here drugging candy. That would be a huge waste of money. My mother, it happened to people before. Me, you mean the guy who poisoned some candy to get several kids sick/killed to cover up what he was giving to his own son to kill him? My mother, you don't know what you're talking about. Hey, that happened in my hometown. Love that that's our legacy. I swear this rumor was started and perpetuated by parents who really just wanted to go through their kids' candy and get first dibs on the good stuff. Wow, all the Reese's cups are poisoned again. 5th year running. Yup, see that, Rich? Someone clearly injected that full-size Snickers bar with drugs. I'd better keep it so I can show the police. In virtually every documented case of Halloween candy being tampered with, it was a family member that did it. I was promised free drugs and never got any. And where are all these dealers handing out free samples to get you hooked? I've been waiting for them for decades. Who's giving out free razor blades in this economy? The food pyramid. The original food pyramid was pretty much plant-based. The meat and dairy lobby had their way with it. When I tell people about Big Milk, I know I sound like a conspiracy loon, but it's real and it goes deep. Even more obvious when you see the industry desperately grasping for more leverage now that oat milk is gaining traction. The MSG myths. I love how many people swear to this day, even the tiniest amount of MSG in Chinese food makes them sick. Yet they can put down an entire bag of Doritos in one sitting without batting an eye. Just because your food doesn't advertise on the front of the package that it contains MSG doesn't mean it isn't a major ingredient. They usually label it as monosodium glutamate, which is what MSG stands for, and people don't even realize they're eating it all the time. It's the secret ingredient that makes a lot of things extra delicious. Turns out the thing in Chinese food making me sick was the shellfish. There's oyster sauce in so much American Chinese food. Here I thought you were in LFO. For the summer. I remember reading that it's naturally occurring in tomatoes and cheese too. So pizza is basically crack. My dad's burgers were always the best. His secret ingredient was praise a la seasoning. The formula is rebranded as Tiger seasoning now. It's mostly salt, sugar, garlic, pepper, and MSG. That different zones of the tongue correspond to different sensations: sweet, sour, spicy, etc. This was taught in middle school, and I tested it out myself with a candy warhead during lunch. I felt like an idiot for believing it, even just for a few hours. I have no idea who convinced every elementary school to teach this like it was a real thing, or why they did so. It flew in the face of common sense and could be easily disproved by anyone. I remember this one, and I remember trying it out with different foods like you. It seemed to me that food tasted the same no matter where you put it. But rather than think the model was wrong, I just assumed my tongue was messed up. As a native Texan, I was taught that the Texas Revolution happened because of land rights. In reality, it was largely because slavery was illegal in Mexico and Texas settlers wanted slaves. They don't really talk about that part in school, the same way many Southerners like to pretend the Civil War had nothing to do with slavery. State rights. State rights to what? Crickets. I mean, it was really about the economy. Okay, what part of the economy? Crickets. That part of the economy was in the North too. So it wasn't just the South. They're all traitorous losers regardless of geography. Well, it was the Democrats who wanted it and started the KKK. Which party did David Duke switch to as it more aligned with his beliefs and garnered him more success in polls in the late 80s? Which party did he run as to win a seat in the Louisiana House of Reps in the early 90s? Which party does the contemporary KKK support? Crickets. That paid closed source software is more secure than free open source software. The war on drugs. In New York you would 15 to life on a nonviolent first offense. No plea deals possible. I grew up rural. Assumed drugs turned you into a murderer. City problems. New York opened dozens of prisons in my area. Prison guard is the most common job in my family. If 85% go back to prison, it means it doesn't work. As a kid growing up in a small town in a northern/Union state in the Midwest, Ohio, I learned that the Civil War was about states' rights, not slavery. While we did learn about slavery generally, it wasn't until I had a very assertive high school teacher that I learned what specific rights those states were most concerned about. Edit, clarifying geography. It's not even speculation. Their own secession documents list slavery as the main reason. How do you even deny that? Technically, yes. Lincoln did frame the war's goal as preserving the Union, but his private correspondence reveals that he was always anti-slavery, and he did eventually make the war about slavery after a big enough win. It was also a brilliant move because it made Europeans reluctant to support slavery, so they turned away from the Confederacy. Stevens was the vice president of the Confederate States of America, and his address on March 21, 1861, he plainly stated the purpose in what's referred to as the cornerstone speech. The equality of the races was an error. It was a sandy foundation, and the government built upon it fell when the storm came and the wind blew. Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first, in the history of the world, based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. I would say the propaganda about saturated fat and cholesterol. I grew up thinking foods like margarine and sugary cereals were healthier than an egg. Yeah. I think the whole low-fat mania was insanely damaging. I can remember my mom yelling at me in the early 90s to not use so much butter on my bread as she basically devoured half a pound of Twizzlers. Low fat. It reminds me of that episode of Seinfeld where they all start eating at a new non-fat, frozen yogurt store. Everyone starts getting fat and no one can figure out why. They send the yogurt to a lab to test for fat, since it's unbelievable that a non-fat food would make you gain weight. That we were saving the trees by switching to plastic bags. One of the biggest and most damaging lies of a generation. That they got milk and how it helps make stronger bones. Turned it out they just had a surplus of dairy milk and were looking for the best way to pawn it off on customers. Personal carbon footprints were created by the oil industry to offload the burden of decarbonization from themselves to consumers. Jaywalking was invented by the auto industry to create a stigma around walking as a mode of transit. People were also getting hit by cars and they wanted to pass the blame to pedestrians. Identity theft is fraud between a thief and the bank/business, redirected to somehow be your problem because the thief happened to pretend to be you. Then the bank/business forces you to prove you were the victim and not the thief, when you were in fact neither. Fuck. This one bothers me more than most of these. Thanks for sharing. A and B-type personalities were invented by tobacco researchers to explain the prevalence of heart disease in smokers. A-type personalities were driven, hardworking, under lots of stress, focused, and of course, more likely to smoke. Ergo, the frequency of dying from heart disease was correlation, not causation, in their hypothesis. Damn, these corporations and big businesses have the best lawyers in the world, so they can get away with murder basically. HR is there to support the employees. That a reduce, reuse, recycle was how we'd save the planet. We need real, hardcore legislation that prioritizes the environment. Not fluffy sayings and greenwashing, smoke-blowing consumer/voter blaming. I mean, reduce, reuse, recycle, in that order, would work but only if it was government mandated and if companies treated recycling as a last resort. Boo, but then the corporations can't sell us cheap plastic bullshit that breaks down in a year. Won't you think of the shareholders and hoarders? All rich people must be smart and work really, really hard. Liberty and justice for all. That the Gardasil vaccine was going to irrevocably mess up my body as a teen. My mom fully bought into what her church told her about it, and I was lucky to have a doctor broach it with me again as an adult before the cutoff. I know when I want legit medical information, my first stop is always a church. That Napoleon was a short man. I learned that this was English propaganda, and that he was actually of average height. It is still a general assumption that Napoleon was short. Breakfast is most important meal of the day, which turns out to be one of many successes of marketing propaganda. I genuinely believed in that UN post-war never again crap as a preteen, and that everyone had learned lessons from WW2/Nazi Germany and was so appalled. Gosh, lawsuits are frivolous. Watch the documentary Hot Coffee. We studied that case in grad school. The coffee was so hot. The case contains the words fused labia. If the USA had better health insurance, a huge chunk of lawsuits would disappear. Most people who are injured just want their medical bills covered. And sometimes it's their insurance companies making them file the suits, because why should they have to pay out if they can find someone else to blame? Not as notable as the McDonald's coffee case. But a number of years ago, a case made some headlines when a woman's nephew ran toward her to give her a hug. Was a little too rough, and broke her wrist, I think. Everyone was appalled that she sued the kid, well, his parents, and made her out to be some heartless monster, but then it turned out that that was the only way she could get her insurance company to pay for the medical care she needed. A friend of mine had to sue a family member after a horrific wreck for this reason. That family went through so much just for an insurance company to make them go through more. Saddam Hussein having WMDs, which led to the invasion of Iraq, not that I fully believed it. America was so adamant he had them, it almost seemed like THRY gave them to him. The fact 12 years later the Union was like, okay, maybe they did lie, then leave it at that was strange. Though really invasions of Middle Eastern countries were based on lies anyway. To depose dictators. Libya's gold magically growing legs and disappearing, Afghanistan being led by the former enemy. And now Syria being ruled by a totally, I swear to God I'm not a terrorist anymore, terrorists don't help the case. I am from the South. I grew up believing in benevolent masters. That the North was unnecessarily aggressive and unreasonable, and that life was better for everyone, both black and white, before the Civil War. Any problems that the South has in the modern era are a direct result of Northern interference during and after the war. I took an African American history class in college and had a few existential crises, many crying jags, and the beginning of my deep distrust of the history I was taught in K-12. When I learned that in some parts of the South they learned about the War of Northern Aggression, it blew my mind. That Hawaii became the 50th state of the US. Voluntarily. That Columbus was a neat guy who came over looking to see what was out there, and made friends with the natives. I remember learning this in kindergarten. We drew pictures of our favorite of his 3 ships. The Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. News reporters. I once gave an interview to a journalist about a topic I was representing. The published article shared almost nothing in common with what I actually said. They wrote the article they wanted and picked a couple quotes from what I said to make it sound like I was saying what they wanted said. That's when I realized nothing I read in the news was true. Here I'll make you quit the news entirely. Knowles' law of media accuracy. This adage states that everything you read in the newspapers is absolutely true except for the rare story of which you happen to have first-hand knowledge. It highlights that when people encounter an error in a story they know personally, they tend to forget that instance and continue to trust the media's accuracy on topics they know less about. The Gelman amnesia effect. Coined by novelist Michael Crichton, this effect describes the phenomenon of an expert noticing errors in a news story on their field of expertise, but then uncritically trusting the accuracy of the rest of the publication. My brother was killed by my cousin's ex-boyfriend when my brother went to help her move her things out of her old apartment. Newspapers the next day reported it was a love triangle and that my cousin's ex caught my cousin cheating on him with my brother. The articles never mentioned they were related. I lost my shit, called like 4 different newspaper editors and told them if they didn't retract the story the next call was coming from my lawyer. I learned that day to not believe shit that I read or hear in the news. The civil rights movement solved racism in America. Good lord, my public school education was bullshit in some respects. Al Gore wants to kill your baby sister in your mommy's tummy, my mom. Circa 1996, pregnant with my strong, courageous and lovely little sister. What a gross, misguided thing to say to a 4-year-old. Just because the man was pro-choice. It's one of my first memories. Alongside a gnarly storm in the same house. Getting older and realizing the insane shit you conservative mother said to a child. I recently checked the date of when the Bill Clinton/Monica Lewinsky scandal happened. I was like 7, and I remember my mom telling me what a whore Monica was, and who wouldn't cheat on Hillary for how much she was a man. Hello, I was 7. I have a similar story. I remember being in 1st grade and mentioning to a classmate that my parents were voting for Al Gore. My classmate, parroting his parents, told me that Al Gore flushed babies down the toilet. I, who had just gotten a baby sister, was understandably distraught at this revelation. When I got home, I started crying and begging my mom not to make this guy president because he flushed babies down the toilet. Eventually, my mom pieced together what had happened and she was so mad that someone had said something like that to their kid, my classmate. I then got a lesson about stem cell research from my very science-why parents. And they are still spreading bullshit like that to this day to take away women's reproductive rights. Growing up in Texas, we were taught that the Texas Revolution was some sort of righteous fight against the evil Mexicans. Turns out things weren't quite that simple and a large part of the revolution was the desire to keep having slaves. The Oklahoma Panhandle only exists as such because Texas viewed giving up a small part of their territory preferential to the, at the time, possible threat of maybe having to eventually give up slavery. One of the worst mistakes in Mexican history was ever letting Anglo-Protestants into Texas. They wanted to populate those mostly neglected territories that had constant raids from nomad groups like the Apache. The conditions included learning Spanish, becoming Catholics, and follow Mexican law, no slaves, and of course, the settlers did none of that. By the time Mexico realized they fucked up, the settlers outnumbered the Hispanic Tejano. Santa Anna made the dumbass move to destroy the Constitution and get captured while sleeping. Television news. More than once I watched a live press conference and recap didn't match what I had just heard. That our rights exist. They are very easy to take away. We have privileges, at best. The same applies to check and balances. They only work if the people responsible for using them are actually interested in keeping others in check. No, the myth is that you are given rights. The truth is you have all the rights you are willing to fight for. The problem is the defeatist attitude that has caused so many to stop fighting. Rights are not God-given. They were created and fought for by brave men and women who believed we could and should do better by one another. We can create new rights and we can ensure them, just like those who came before us did. This is an interesting philosophical question. I would argue that rights do in fact exist, just not in the way people think. For example, no one can police your inner beliefs. You are free to think whatever you want. Sure, sometimes in certain parts of the world voicing those beliefs can end you in trouble, but the inner workings of your mind are in fact your own. I personally believe the idea that there are no rights, just privileges, is a dangerous philosophy. Taking this to the logical conclusion, then no person or country can be charged with human rights violations because human rights don't exist. That would mean things like slavery or religious persecution should be fine if the country says it is. The only thing that makes those wrong is the idea that every human has a set of rights that should not be infringed upon. DARE was an attempt to reduce kids from getting into drugs. Turns out, just one power-tripping LA detective wanted to spy on families in school, so he forced DARE. My uncle was our local DARE rep back in the day. As part of his court-mandated community service for possession of drugs, he got arrested while on his probation for dealing at a DARE rally. Tell me more. Our local school board had on the agenda the elimination of DARE. One of the teachers thought we should keep funding it, so he had his students write a paper in class about how great it was. My son wrote about how it was worthless and a waste of time and money. The teacher did not take kindly to this and tore up the paper and yelled at him in front of the class and to rewrite it the correct way. When the teacher went before the board meeting defending DARE, he was waving in the air all the papers written by his students defending the program. My wife was at the meeting and pissed. She brought up how the kids were forced to write the papers, saying what he wanted to. He was a bass to my son afterwards. Wife had to complain to the principal about that. Hard work pays off. No, the reward is burnout and more work. Early on in my old army career, I had a colonel tell me, "LT, you worked hard and did a great job, and I reward a great job with more work." To this day, I loathe that attitude of piling things on and burning myself and others out, yet appreciate their raw candor since at least I knew I was screwed right away. Hard work does pay off, the difference is whether you're working for yourself or someone else. That the government wants what is best for us and works in our best interest. That we live in a meritocracy. In the same vein, that the job force is a meritocracy and that the smartest and/or hardest workers are the ones who get promotions/pay increases. A majority of it is about how well you can schmooze the higher-ups or how charismatic you are. If you're quiet, professional, and try to do your job well, no one really cares. Edit, I guess. For some reason, OP assumed I was the cool guy in this scenario. I'm just the quiet one who gets no raises. I was talking about my sad realization about the workforce. I was considering joining the military when I was fresh out of high school. After getting older and talking to people who served, I think 100% of my reasons for wanting to join were just the result of military propaganda. The military will toughen you up/teach you confidence and discipline/teach you to be a man. No, time will do those things. Even with no outside influence, you'll have way more self-confidence and agency in your life at 26 than you had at 18, along with all the benefits of that. The military pays well. No, not for what it'll cost you. For sure. Even with no education, you could become a plumber, electrician, garbage man, or police officer and put yourself on a path to making way more money with less stress. And you can quit if you decide you don't like it or you have an abusive coworker. Chicks dig guys in uniform. Gold diggers dig guys in uniform. Chicks dig guys who still have both their legs and won't beat the shit out of her at 2 a.m. because he had a PTSD episode. You'll get to travel the world. You'll either be stuck in a base in Alabama slowly getting lung cancer from diesel fumes or stuck in a base in Kuwait slowly getting lung cancer from diesel fumes. Save up and do a road trip to Florida or California instead. You'll be able to serve your country. The current public stance of the United States federal government is that Jeffrey Epstein didn't traffic anyone. I could do a lot more for my country by engaging in local mutual aid and social activist groups or running for a position on a local school board. Unfortunately, joining the military is one of the only surefire ways out of poverty in America. My 5 years serving were rough, but absolutely changed the outlook of my life. I truly believed in duty, honor, country. I learned a lot over the years of who gets assaulted, sexually assaulted, what freedoms we protect and promote and where, who gets murdered, who gets promoted, infiltrations by white supremacist groups, etc. I've met good people too, but the military is, kindly, a very mixed bag. Gold diggers. Guys in the military hardly have any gold to dig. Good job not joining. I unfortunately learned the hard way. I'm now the mod of r/regret joining and I live in Canada. The Thanksgiving Pilgrim story. Republicans are better with the economy. They're factually not better. Their goal is to make the rich more rich. That's pretty much it. Even Trump is on record saying the Democrats are better with the economy, and that Republicans are better with the deficit and national debt. I'll also throw in that they are the party of family values. This one makes sense when you look at how long it takes laws to go into effect. My own parents before the last election said our tax returns are always higher under a Republican. They live in a mobile home. But the most recent round of Republican tax laws were slated to take effect years after they lost the election. And therefore the other party gets credit or blame when the person who is affected never watched Schoolhouse Rock. American dream: work hard and you will have a house and car. Such absolute shit. Hard work makes your boss richer, not you. You can work 3 jobs and not have enough for rent. When I was a kid, the American dream was that each generation would be wealthier than the previous. Now, it's be downscaled to the house and car. Imagine what the next version might be. I thought climate change was a hoax. Then I read a book by one of the chief denialists, and realized he, a scientist, was talking bullshit. Well done that author, you persuaded me that you were wrong. Does alpha male account? It has spread through so much of our culture and become an excuse for bad behavior in men. You aren't an alpha, you're a dick. That watering your lawn is going to make a difference in water use. We are all made guilty to take short showers and use water sparingly when corporations use millions and millions of gallons of water without restriction. And when you consider how much is used in the upkeep of golf courses, save your water. We need it to cool the AI data centers. Both things can be true. Lawns are the biggest irrigated crop in the United States. That all Americans are evil and want to harm my country, Cuba. When I was still a student, we were always reminded how horrible the American people were. I grew up believing this because at that time, only prestigious doctors, people in high government positions, and some military personnel had access to the internet for private use, albeit with restrictions. With the widespread arrival of the internet in the country, I've realized that the vast majority of Americans I've talked to are cool. I even have a friend who lives in Chicago, and once a week we meet on a website called Jiggy to put together puzzles. Our government is absolutely fucking evil. People are generally cool though. Yeah. It's just the government that's evil. And some people, but not all the people. Justice and karma exist. The law is fair. Things always go right in the end. Just FTR, the concept of a karma is mostly completed, misquoted, and misunderstood by the West, and the karma yoga is intricately intertwined with reincarnation. It never comes back to you in your present life. Feels relevant pointing this out given them of the thread. Until I was like 12. I genuinely believed that America was the only country in the world that gave its citizens human rights. I thought literally the entire rest of the world was heavily authoritarian hellscape. Partly learned from Christian school. Maybe not that extreme for me, but constantly being told that America is the most free country in the world definitely had me assuming that every other country had at least a law or two that wouldn't fly here. Like that the British didn't have freedom of speech or something. It's bizarre how tenacious this belief is. I traveled a bunch once upon a time to lots of non-typical destinations for an American. I often meet people who will literally shut down and stop conversation when I imply I had a good time off US soil, and reactivate anytime I detail a relatively minor complaint about like city planning or weather. And the people who still believe this are the same people who cheer as their rights are systematically stripped away at an unprecedented rate. As a child of the 80s, what the hell wasn't I told that wasn't propaganda? I mean, certainly in school. The number of times you find out teachers oversimplified things or flat out lied because it was inconvenient was astounding. Everything from America's founding forward was pretty much lies or dramatic coverage of the darker truths. Growing up in the South, we were taught the Confederacy cared more about states' rights than slavery. That chattel slavery wasn't all bad because they got a home of their own and food, and the American hero John Brown was a traitor without really covering his beliefs. That plastics are easily recyclable. Trump was a good businessman.